A special welcome to obviously all my Bases colleagues, but even more special to all my FEPSI colleagues. I've missed terribly since Peter mentioned council a few years ago. It's a great privilege to introduce Dr. Angus Mugford here as our first keynote speaker as Director of High Performance at the Toronto Blue Jays. Angus is a fellow Brit who left the UK 17 years ago now. You'll find he's struggling to finesse his American accent, but not struggling with his career. He completed his first degree in psychology and sports science at the University of Birmingham in the late 1990s before completing his master's and PhD degrees in counselling, psychology and sports science at the University of Kansas, where he focused on the psychology of team harmony and group dynamics, at the same time as working through his Bases accreditation in sports science support, and then the other qualifications professionally within US sports psychology. In 2004, he was appointed as director of the IMG Mental Conditioning Services division at the IMG Academies in their beautiful student-athlete campus at Bradenton in Florida. I definitely encourage you to go there if you ever get the chance. At that time, he, as the leader of that division of mental conditioners, he mentored over 100 interns, sports psychologists with master's degrees, who came over for the long, hot summers of toil, trying to support young people over an 8 or 9 week period. And that particular experience has led to many UK sports psychologists developing careers from that particular process. So thanks a lot for inviting lots of British people over for the internship there. He transitioned in 2013 to be director of the IMG Institute, which was more managing the external facing contracts, all the sports science contracts, with corporate sport, corporate athletes, the military, and also professional sports. And that led on to being approached by his current employer, the Toronto Blue Jays, as the Director of High Performance, looking after and coordinating and leading the sports medicine, sports science, strength conditioning and mental performance services of that particular large-scale outfit. So, in addition to being the most recent ASP president, which is probably the single largest organisation of applied sports psychologists in the world, we felt it was timely to take a US perspective in terms of looking at a person to talk to us around who's at the heart of directing high performance services within a professional sport outfit. So Angus, you're very welcome, and we look forward to hearing you talk. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks everyone, and yeah, I do apologize for the accent. It's I call it mid-Atlantic. It's not quite American, not quite British, not sure where it is, but Chris let the cat out of the bag, and I am originally from the UK, and so this is an extra special, humbling opportunity and real honor to speak to you all today and share some of my experiences and hopefully resonate with the varying perspectives that we have here in the room, and in a pretty short time span, so I'll do my best. But I actually want to start kind of at the beginning, and I am humbled by all the amazing opportunities that I've had over the years, and I really do think it's the right place, right time to be available for these things and making the most of those. But I do still feel like the 13-year-old I was in 1990, sitting in front of the TV and witnessing a historic win for Scotland. Any Scots in the audience, please? So the Scots in here will all say that this wasn't an upset, this was destiny, it was going to happen. Called Angus, raised in England, there was a lot of complicated group dynamics in my family, so this was a big deal. And I was mortified at England losing in this particular situation, but it created this burning curiosity about why do teams win and why do they lose and what can we do about it. Watching the teams before the game, it was clear to me that Scotland had a mental and emotional edge in that particular contest, and created this curiosity that has certainly continued to be a theme throughout my life. And I think you'll see hopefully here a couple of themes coming through this presentation. There's one from Chris mentioned with my experience at IMG is my life is really about helping get the most from each individual that I'm around, helping them be the performers that they are capable of becoming. And a lot of that is to do with behavior change. And to the point that I am now, it's really become much more about systems and the systems approach to behavior change as opposed to each individual. And the second component of that, and probably the reason that I am with the Blue Jays in my role of Director of High Performance and no longer in the sports psychology train or thread, however you want to describe it, but is actually about it's about collaboration. It's not about psychology. It's not about biomechanics or physiology. It's about the performer, and it's about helping provide an environment and help them get the most out of themselves as they can, and also focusing on the support team as performers as well. And so that's really been my remit and the exciting opportunity that was created for me with the Blue Jays. So now, part of the title here is about culture, and it is about creating a system of high performance within our context. And so I'm guessing that there isn't a lot of baseball expertise in the audience, so forgive me if I'm wrong with that, but I will nurse you through some of the assumptions and challenges as I've been on my learning curve for the last couple of years of baseball. But most importantly, what was really compelling to me about this opportunity was the leadership. The president of the Blue Jays was only hired 2 years ago. And he wanted me to come in with him and help change the culture of that organization and actually shift the paradigm of baseball and how baseball was approaching performance in sport. Now, who can say no to a president unless it says the American in the room, right? But the key part about that is that Mark Shapiro started with the Cleveland Indians. He was there for 26 years. Started as an intern and left as the president. He's a remarkable individual, and he was really all about creating a culture-based organization that was really driven by the values. And the culture really ultimately came to getting better every day and being a learning organization. And you'll see why in terms of competitive advantage and challenges that we particularly have. But I want to share just a clip, a video that we put together as we went through a process that was inclusive of defining the mission of getting better every day and tying it to baseball and making it authentic to the individuals within the organization so they had input and as an authentic story to our leadership team, but also to each staff member. So you're going to hear from Ross Atkins, the general manager, who's my direct boss, and then Mark Shapiro is the president, and some other individuals in our organization, just describing the values-based system and how that ties into our particular context.
The more you're collaborating, the more you're thinking as a group, the more creative you're going to be, the more innovative, and the more tied everyone's going to be to decision making.
How much better can we be if we work hard to feel a sense of connectivity to each other, of learning from each other, of making sure that we take advantage of the experiences that each one of us has.
Learning is the only truly sustainable competitive advantage that anyone can have.
For that to happen, we need to pool our collective talent, our collective experiences, our collective intellect, and think about how much more powerful we can be.
Whether it is a player or a coach or a scout, you're going to make mistakes. And I think that as long as we continue to learn, we can limit those mistakes and learn from them.
It's paramount for each of us as leaders, and we all lead in some way, to empower those around us to contribute, to make a difference.
I think it's important that each guy realize that he can make an impact and is empowered to do so. That it's not just that, oh, I'm just a coach, I can't make a difference. Yes, you can. You can make a huge difference. Or I'm just a scout, is my voice going to be heard? Absolutely going to be heard.
They trust the fact that I'm not going to hurt a player. I'm only there to help. And I think that's important. It makes me feel good. I think it makes all the employees feel good.
Well, you want to win a World Series, well, you're going to have to go jump some fences. It's a very difficult thing, but focus on process allows us to get there in a way, as long as you stick to the plan.
Nobody cares about your statistics for the season. You know, they care about the team, and you know, just caring about that emblem on the front of the jersey, not on the back of the jersey type thing.
Excellence to me is a culture where people hold themselves to very high standards and others to high standards, and they recognize the greatness that can be achieved when that level of excellence is both expected from themselves and from others.
In order to gain respect, you have to give respect, and it's just one of those things that's the way it works.
It doesn't matter what somebody's job is, you know, if they're part of the organization, really in life in general, you know, you show some respect. It's vital to the success of an organization.
Respecting isn't just treating people nicely, it's truly thinking about the shoes that they're walking in, trying to help them do a better job.
Respect goes a long way in this game, a lot further than talent. So being able to play the game the right way, being able to hold yourself accountable on and off the field, and doing everything you can in your power to be a role model.
Fly ball deep left field. Yes, sir, a walk-off home run again.
If you're not focused on being the best in professional sports, someone else is. We're trying to create an environment for people to be the best in the world on a baseball field.
The 3-2 pitch, swing and a miss, he struck him out.
This is Toronto Blue Jays baseball. Collaborate, learn, empower, achieve, respect.
All right. So it's clearly it's one thing to have an aspirational vision. It's a very different thing to manage and change the behaviors on a daily basis. So hopefully those will come through as I kind of follow up our next pieces. But so what about baseball? One thing that I think is really important to share off the bat is, while our Major League roster has 25 players, we actually have 250 players in our organization. So from 17-year-olds at our Dominican Academy, where every of our 30 Major League Baseball franchises have an academy that's a hotbed for young Latin American talent, all the way through to the Major League roster. And what you can see there is we're in the business of transition and helping develop and grow these players from 17 all the way through to our oldest players who may be even 40 years old, ancient like me. Now, in our baseball operations, we actually have about 200 staff. So you can see the ratio is very strong. But actually, I have about 45 staff that report to me in our high performance division of full-time staff members. But we also have about 50 scouts. We have about the same on, if not more, on our coaching standpoint as well as operations. But these four phases in the pie chart are really important when you're looking at the timeline and kind of what are the phases and lifespan of that talent management, which are straightforward when you look at a lot of talent management processes. And that's first the identification, which is really predominantly our scouting departments and our analytics to be able to assess value. And then acquisition, which again is taking that value and looking to actually acquire that talent, whether it's through trades, whether it's through our drafting systems. A unique setup in the United States where actually for baseball, you can draft an 18-year-old out of high school in the same draft that you can also take a 22-year-old out of college. So there really is a lot of disparity and a challenge when you're talking about comparing apples to apples. Then comes development. You have players and now it's on the emphasis here for actually developing and making the most of the talent that we have and then managing and putting winning teams together. Now, high performance has kind of been an afterthought in a lot of baseball in the past. And traditionally, that's been around strength and conditioning, athletic training. And so before I show you kind of our current model, which will be very familiar to a lot of you in here, one of our other challenges here, you saw the Dominican through to Major League, but our scale is also a significant challenge. You can see here this map of our 9 different teams in 8 different cities in 3 different countries, including Vancouver, which is certainly the anomaly, and almost probably a similar distance from Florida to London as it is from Florida out to Vancouver. So we have a lot of logistical challenges, and I'll talk about some more of those as we go through. But picture that, with our different teams, and now embedding a high-performance model, which you see here predominantly in red, of assigning expertise around a player-centered, coach-driven, collaborative approach to developing our talent. Now, there are other roles here in terms of that talent ID and acquisition that our experts are starting to broaden and help. But really the bread and butter is around the development opportunity we have. And every single one of our teams has a strength coach and athletic trainer. But believe it or not, that when I came in, that was all that was there. There were physicians, there was a clinical psychologist on board, but there was no mental performance or sports psychology. In fact, there were no dietitians in baseball, period, until 2 years ago. And also, sports science is very ill-defined in the marketplace in professional sports in the United States, and is largely seen as technology and the input of technology into strength and conditioning, or some in medicine. So really trying to shift that paradigm and broaden into more of what they'll call a European model in many instances, but is one of the reasons that we're seeing an influx of Europeans, Australians, New Zealanders in particular, going into the professional market over there. So this seems straightforward, but has actually instituted a significant paradigm shift for baseball. And that's not unfamiliar to us either. I think when you are familiar with it, we still all see things with a different lens. Something as simple in baseball as fielding a ground ball from one of our infielders. The psychologist may look at that, brain-body connection. The physical therapist may see that, the neural pathways and the movement patterns involved, and the bias around the strength conditioning may be looking at capacity of workload. So the key here for us is that we're starting to shift this model into a collaborative science. That baseball analytics, maybe raise your hands if you've seen or read Moneyball. Okay, many of you are familiar with that. The analytics on the side of baseball are incredible, but every piece of data that is used is typically once the ball leaves the hand or it leaves the bat. There's really no information that's gathered or collected on what's happening within the human being element of that. And so again, I think that's forging the combination of these sciences, whether it's psychological, whether it's medical, whether it's around the athletic development, movement, strength and conditioning sciences, to really call this the science of sport and really be focused on what are the questions and challenges we are trying to solve and overcome, and start to look at it as less intimidating and less siloed and more collaborative, which is a significant shift. Now, all sounds good in theory, right? But what I ask for you right now is I want you to go ahead and just fold your arms. Some of you understand you're folding your arms already. I won't take it personally. But fold your arms, okay? And what I want you to do now is I want you to deliberately reverse your hands. And if your hand was on top, now put it on the bottom, okay? I can see some steam coming out of ears. It's weird, isn't it? Okay, so how many of you want to immediately unfold them and refold them the other way, right? So 1, it's challenging, but 2, it's really uncomfortable, and that's just folding your arms. Sometimes we forget what it's like to be a learner. right? We forget that change is uncomfortable by definition. And so having a great degree of empathy and being really aware of readiness for change and pace of change is a significant piece of my role, which again I think lends my background and path in behavior change and sports psychology is I can really understand where I leverage those skills on a daily basis in my current situation and context. Now, you might wonder about, what's this statement about? I was actually in a meeting last summer, it's a year ago, on my first year, our first year of change, where our head of coach development was sitting across the table and meeting about 20 people, and this was his statement. I'm not sure if I buy into the idea of getting better. Now, it's kind of a curious thing, somebody who's in charge of leading our coach development, but the subtext, once I kind of took my jaw off the table, was and actually the importance of buy-in and understanding. I don't think he was talking about getting better and learning. I think he was talking about change. And why, with this paradox of baseball that they are, for professional sport in the United States, they're 150 years old. They've been doing a lot of things great. And why there is a need for change, as opposed to an old school kind of fixed mindset around a lot of things. They actually inherently understand development in a way that other North American sports arguably don't do. So the NFL, National Football League, American football, and NBA basketball typically have a period of about 2 years from drafting a player to defining, seeing whether or not they make a roster, make the impact that they're expected to, or that they would move on, release, trade, and scout and find another replacement. But there is a real scouting bias, in my opinion, that there is such an abundance of talent, the emphasis goes towards scouting. A lot of the general managers and leadership on the front offices come from a scouting background, and so there is a real bias towards talent, which is no doubt important, but a neglect to development, which again I think is why you're seeing some of the talent poorer countries and areas where we have to be a lot more resourceful and maximize talent that are being drawn into the United States setup now. If you can bring resourcefulness and resources together, you can really get something special. But it really put me in a position of understanding how important that pace of change, readiness of change was, and making sure that we were being very deliberate about buy-in and understanding value of why change is being asked for. Now, this is a pretty big motivator to a lot of people. And just to put a little scale to the finances of baseball in particular, when I arrived in Toronto, we actually lost a player to the agency that's arguably one of the best players in Major League Baseball. David Price was his name. He's a pitcher. And in baseball, a pitcher plays once every 5 games, typically a starting pitcher. And this individual, his price tag when he signed with the Boston Red Sox was $30 million US. Now, for $30 million, the Boston Red Sox essentially got his services for 30 games. You can do the maths. That's approximately $1 million per game for David Price. Of our starting 5 rotation, we actually had 2 players who were pitchers who were homegrown. So they came through our draft, they came through our development system, and they were young in their career, but they were starting pitchers in our 5. We lost David Price for $30 million. But those 2 players, Marcus Stroman and Aaron Sanchez, both combined for $1 million for the entire season. So you can see that the financial return on investment for a team developing their own talent through their system is significant compared to buying free agents from other teams. And you'll see, again, part of the reason that this is significant is because of our competition. Now, anyone recognize the logos in the back there? So, New York Yankees and Boston Red Sox happen to be in our division. Baseball has 6 divisions. each division has 5 teams, and we happen to have Red Sox and Yankees in ours. Now, the Manchester United right now, I did a quick search to find out what the net worth was of these teams. Manchester United right now is approximately worth $2.2 billion. And compared to the Red Sox, and the Red Sox are worth approximately $2.7 billion, and the Yankees are worth approximately $3.7 billion. Now, there's no salary cap in baseball, and it's not just on salaries, but these teams are free to spend as much as they wish on their own development system, on their staffing, and so immediately there is a massive competitive advantage to them, and so we have to be doing something differently. If we go by expectations and by value, we should come 3rd place every year. Now, what makes us a little bit unique is we're the only team outside of the United States, so we actually draw from a fan base of 35 million people, and a brand and identity of representing a country, which is amazing. But we also have a 25% exchange rate. So for every dollar we're spending an extra 25 cents to the dollar, which when you're talking multi-million-dollar contracts or payroll, about 25-man roster of 160 million, is pretty significant. So immediately there is a sense of urgency for us to have a competitive advantage, and for us that's around learning. Other challenges? Yeah, I'll throw more. 162, what's that? Well, that's the number of games we play in 180 days. 180 days, 162 games. We play about 30 games in preseason, and we play up to 20 to 30 in the off-season if we're fortunate enough to make the playoffs. Now, I'd forgotten how much I hate losing. In baseball, you lose a lot. The best teams are losing around 60 games, if not more. So it really is an incredible and unique sport where you are playing games pretty much every day. This also poses some interesting challenges from a sports science perspective, because we don't play all our games at home. You know, for us, every away game is an international. So we do cross the border and go through immigration, but just showing you a distribution here of games across the league. We actually play our division the most, so we get to play the Yankees and Red Sox 32 times. You get to know each other pretty well by the end. But we also have trips like this one. I did a breakdown. Over the season, over 6 months, 180 days, we did 33,000 miles last year. The team who did the most was Seattle. They did over 40,000 miles. The team who did the less were Pittsburgh, did about 22. But for one trip, we had a 9-day stretch playing games every day. I had an afternoon game. I flew out from Toronto, the star at the top right, out to Los Angeles to play the Angels, and then on our way back after 4 games, played St. Louis, and then back to Toronto. Now, let's see if I can click over here to our schedule. So we're not going to change the fact that we play every day. So we have to look at what opportunities are there, what low-hanging fruit do we have to be able to maximize that recovery and ability to prepare to play the next day. So you can see from our games here, we played 9 in a row. It's almost a 6-hour flight from Toronto to LA. We weren't arriving until midnight LA time. Obviously, we made up 3 hours with the time difference. But we would give players a strategy around how much to potentially sleep and nap on the plane versus when their target bedtime and wake-up time would be at the hotel. We get individual preferences for players, and one of those small, again, low-hanging fruit, we don't have to be high-tech in our sports science when we can ask the hotel to do something as simple as drawing the curtains in a player's room before they arrive. How many of you have arrived at a hotel late at night, gone to bed, only to be woken by the sunshine coming in right in the morning, right? There's something as simple as that, even setting the temperature to an optimal slot before a player even gets in a room, are really simple interventions that can have a significant impact over a 6-month season. Likewise, having access, having a couple of sleep pods in our clubhouse that are private, accessible, easy for players to get during their routine during the day, as well as an actigraph of, we have simple Whoop bands and things that players have access to monitor and collect data on their own. One interesting caveat to that, and I've had feedback from some practitioners working in the UK that it's been very simple most of the time to get compliance from players to monitor and do different things, but certainly in the United States that's not the case at the professional level. That the Players Association even came into our spring training and actively told players not to share any data with our organization and front office because of the fear of how data could be used by front office in contract negotiations and other things. Which is incredibly frustrating when the goal is to help them optimize their individual recovery and focus, and can sometimes breed mistrust. And so it puts that much more emphasis onto really only collecting what is helpful and what we need to do for that player, and also having a really good mechanism for a process of why, but also how that data is managed. And I think the MLB's Player Association is by far the strongest of American pro sports. And so a lot of the other pro organizations out there are waiting to see how MLB manages this, that will set a precedent for others. And I think long term will also have an implication to the rest of the world in how to manage privacy and player data and use it in an ethical way. So it's fun in some respects to be on the tip of the spear through that process, but it's also a significant challenge with what we're trying to do. So you heard me say it in the video too, but especially with competition that can outspend us 2 to 3 times over what we have to spend, our ability to learn is key. It's critical, and we are somewhat limited if we can't collect all the information that we want from players, but we need to be able to have an evidence base for why we are driving our decision making the way we are. So I think this is really pertinent too to levels of evidence, and knowing that in the research literature, the ability to put our players in a controlled lab setting and in our environment is clearly impossible. But being scientific and being evidence-based in what we do is huge. And using the language that is also collaborative with coaches is huge. And this model helped us a lot develop buy-in with some of the more traditional managers and coaches, and not eliminating the instincts and the gut feel and the subjective feedback from those coaches, but calling that experiential data. You know, it's valid in its own form as long as we understand it for what it is, and that we also understand there is not a crystal ball that is perfectly going to execute and create outcomes that we're striving for. But what we're doing is we're reducing the speculation. We're reducing the lack of clarity or unknown. And so that derived data becomes that wider chunk that we're able to get more clarity and more objective about, without diminishing the role of the experiential and subjective piece, which especially important for, you don't hear many English or quasi-English accents in baseball. So I also have to clarify my learning curve and really asking simple questions about objectifying what does it take to win, and helping coaches and managers articulate their thoughts on what those are and help draw those discussions, which are very valuable. So we've alluded to behavior change, right? So while it's perhaps an outdated model in a lot of respects, I do think about how I'm defining success in terms of behavior change and pace of change. And when you look at the trans-theoretical model here, I often think about that pre-contemplation to contemplation shift. Somebody who's not on their radar to be making a change, to suddenly being able to ask questions and think about things a little bit differently. They're not all the way there, they're not buying in, but we're shifting people along that continuum. And I think that people in my role and sometimes in the sports sciences, we can forget sometimes that making a shift across here is actually a significant step, and that really paying attention to where people are in that readiness for change in a collaborative environment is important, as is the context for how much time and how many resources do you have to help people manage change. I guess this is actually following on, I didn't have a method to my madness. So one of the things, we talk about levels of evidence, and you know, we're not always looking at the research literature, but we are trying to learn from other high-performing teams from other industries, which baseball hasn't historically been great at. Some organizations have, but Google are one such organization we've spent some time with, and part of their being such a data-driven organization, it's very easy for them to generate and use their data and look at their effectiveness and performance outcomes. And one of the things they looked at in the high-performing teams was this number one feature and construct of psychological safety. Now, I haven't seen it empirically looked at in other sources, but that issue of safety is one that is hugely prevalent in professional sports, where what I would maybe label a survivor mentality. Because of the status, because of the attraction, a lot of people in that environment tend to want to hold on to it. And even our environment is no different. We have one athletic trainer who's been with the organization for 37 years, but they've also had 37 one-year contracts. Now think about what that does to the psychology of an employee when they have one-year contracts. Now understand there's also a paradox there, right? You've also been rehired 37 times. So that must give you somewhat level of confidence. But are we rewarding status quo behavior? Are we rewarding people who are avoiding risk and going with that status quo? When what we're really trying to reward is positive risk-taking, is learning, and understanding that includes failure. So to help people embrace the idea that failure is really not learning, that we're creating some safety, but also doing it in a cost-effective way. So one of the areas, again, bridging outside of maybe some of the traditional sports sciences, I've been fascinated to look at the world of business as well, and what some of the newer technologies are able to help us do and monitor with things like sociometric badges, looking at the quality and quantity of information flow, and on the understanding that in the most collaborative, most productive environments, the quality and quantity of that communication flows very evenly. Now, we haven't studied and looked at this in our environment, but I think there's an intriguing piece around this collaboration and communication flow that warrants a lot of investigation. And as I said, I think is a challenge around interdisciplinary work, is this notion of reaching out of our silo and expertise, and even with bases, I know the history of the interdisciplinary scope is a game changer, especially relative to the academic systems and training and preparation of the education system in the United States for how athletic training, strength and conditioning, and sports psychology, and even dietitian pathways are typically fairly siloed until they get into that work environment. And I think there are some wonderful opportunities here to really explore how we can shift that paradigm into a much more collaborative type of environment. Now, I apologize, I know this is a busy slide. But this in essence, and I'll start on the right-hand side and then draw my way back in, but here in red are the clarity around the goals and outcomes that our high-performance team are driving for. So whether you're a dietitian, whether you're a sports psychologist, whether you are a strength coach or one of our sports scientists or physical therapists, we're all driving towards the health and availability of our players. If they can't be on the field, then they're not technically helping the outcomes for our organization. Likewise, our goal is to help them perform at the highest level, to be at their best when their best is needed. Performance is one of our outcomes. And then finally is development, that we want them to grow and continue to develop. And as you saw from our timeline, we expect that journey to be anywhere from 5 years or beyond to be able to make our Major League roster. Now, granted, our Major League roster is only 25 people, so one of the things that was really key in me understanding was that it's actually about Major League value that we are generating. So some of our youngsters will not make it to a Major League roster, but they may help us in a trade that allows us to add to our Major League roster that is about the value, not necessarily them being on our Major League roster at the end of the day. So having clarity around those outcomes really strips the discipline out of it, and we start looking at the player in the middle and their daily routine of how they prepare, how they do their work, and how they recover. Knowing that there are multiple elements, and there happen to be 7 on here, there are clearly more. This was actually just an example that we set up for a player. When we were discussing with them, this is a player who was injured early in our year, who had trouble complying with a lot of the things. He's paid $19 million a year, and most of it is on talent. His work ethic is very strong, but his lifestyle and the things that he's doing off the field are not necessarily aligned for long-term success. So for us to really present and really develop that story, that narrative around why and how these components bring together are really key in being able to look at the collaborative whole and how each of our staff members impact that, and the player understand how they all fit in the bigger picture. So, likewise, I mentioned monitoring, but for our 5 starting pitchers, they are the ones who have the most downtime. They have 4 days in between their starts, sometimes with an off day too, and so they've been the easiest ones for us to be able to look at and start to capture more information, because a lot of them develop their routines over a long time, and it's more based on personal awareness than it is about actual objective feedback about how their body is responding. So introducing and incorporating analytics from what's happening to their actual performance with speed and spin rates and different aspects of their pitching. So also the mechanics and collaborating with the coaches with what do they see and what's happening physically are combined with our biomechanics specialists, but also with our strength coaches. And then looking at how does their profile of their performance fit from a medical and physical standpoint. And then also with the psychological standpoint of how they are working through those days, their recovery, and the other factors that they have going on in their life too. So many examples, but you amplify that by 250 players. We're having to be very strategic about prioritizing, not doing everything, but focusing on things that give us the highest leverage. Now, this is probably a very controversial slide, but something that I think conceptually, keeping it as simple as we can, was really helpful in empowering our staff with identifying a continuum of health to illness, and looking at primary versus secondary roles. So you can see here on a physical spectrum from physician to strength coach, helping them understand that actually they're working around very similar physical parameters, but at just very different ends of the spectrum. And that while at certain stages during an injury or during a period of high performance, they'll have very different roles with that player, they are still supporting. So the strength coach with that high performing player maybe have as a primary role, the physician still has a secondary and support role, that they're not completely disconnected, that there's a relationship between those. And somewhat similar with our mental health or mental illness versus our mental performance staff, that there is a continuum and a relationship between our staff that is collaborative and not simply referring out, but a model that we're really trying to foster, which is this concept of not saying, or someone else's problem, it's, hey, let's bring other people on our team to into that conversation. And likewise with dietitians and sports scientists, they'll probably people who really span that spectrum. Now, last couple of slides here, and coming back to the strategic standpoint, and as Chris mentioned, my hat as the president of the Association for Applied Sports Psychology is I really care about the opportunity to grow jobs and a sustainable job market, which has been happening over the last 5 to 10 years in the United States. There are about 45 sports psychology professionals in baseball right now, which is a significant explosion, almost 200 in the military. But ASP has gone through a period right now of creating a new certification that helps professionalize and standardize the profession to a higher degree, similar to the process that athletic trainers and strength coaches went through in the United States. And so this flow is really a cycle. It's having the jobs that create sustainable growth for students and for the education system. It's how many opportunities, internship sites and supervision post-graduation that allow the development to be ready for, especially in high-risk populations and environments that really take a lot of expertise and time to develop the skills to be there. And then probably one of the things we don't talk nearly enough about, which is the evaluation and feedback. And this really ties into my last piece here, which is the yin-yang of the research and practice is that we're tying effective practice to effective outcomes. And this idea here of, in the middle, you see my boss Mark Shapiro here with a few cameras in his face, but he believes because he understands the return on investment. The money that I shared with you before, if we're keeping players healthier and on the field, if we're developing and maximizing our talent, or even shortening that development window and not wasting our efficiencies through that development, we are saving money. We are generating money in some cases. So having that value proposition is huge, and the research practitioner relationship around those things is enormous to measure not just discipline-specific or intervention-specific work, but I think a huge area of opportunity I'd like to see a lot more done around is actually in the interdisciplinary success. And there are a lot of multidisciplinary teams out there. A lot of teams will hire experts, but what we end up seeing happening is we have those 10 experts around a player, and they're providing their insight and inputs into that player who's flooded with not knowing exactly what they should be doing. Whereas really what takes a lot of work is having those same experts and that interdisciplinary focus of talking together and creating one program, one plan, one message around that player to maximize their development and opportunity. And I think that while it's a simple concept, it is not easy. And that is the crux of my role and job, is to bring experts together and allow them to be at their best, but leverage the expertise of each other with that player and that coach driving that mission forward, and not about showing off our expertise or how much we know, but really being deliberate about the outcomes that we're trying to generate. And I think that context is one of those tough things. In our environment, they call it feel, which I think is a wonderful description. But again, having non-baseball experts, but in that environment, it can take a long time to build trust and seconds to lose it. Being in the dugout or the bench at the wrong time, saying the wrong thing, trying to give a protein shake immediately after a loss. The little nuances that can actually really hurt your credibility are really significant. And so actually putting time and investment into the context of how you operate in an environment, because they can be very, very unforgiving places if you're thrown into that extreme too early. And I think that as a profession and an industry, and again, not as a sports psychology trained person here, but as someone that cares about the sports sciences and about how we're leveraging expertise in these environments, whether it's through wellness, whether it's through performance in this instance, is about also how do we get the training, the right supervision and opportunities post-graduation, and into the volume of people where I think there are incredible opportunities out there. There are a lot of jobs, but we need to be able to make sure that we're providing sustainable success and a platform for people to get there effectively. So that is my soapbox. And Chris, how have I done for time? Good stuff. All right. Well, thank you. I'm happy to open up to a few questions.
Hands up.
Not all at once.
Thanks for the presentation. Just from a site perspective, how do you, what do you monitor around like stress and recovery in your athletes?
Great question. So I'd say we're not very sophisticated around monitoring on the psychology standpoint right now. So we have been starting to institute and roll out wellness surveys on a daily basis. Again, it's not something that we've dived into because even the concept of mental performance and sports psychology is new. Not to baseball, but in the context environment we're in. So what we did do though is we have one mental health expert who does an amazing job, and then we have 3 mental performance coaches that work very closely with the coaching staffs and also the players themselves. So a lot of that mechanism is actually executed through the coaching staff to be able to provide regular feedback. But I think again, it's one of my challenges is prioritizing and being able to look at like a kid in a candy store. There are so many things, but I think being really disciplined about what we go after and when is really difficult. So I think that's an area to explore in the future.
Hi, thank you for that. Sarah from Brighton Hove Albion, who I would suggest are maybe the equivalent within a premiership at the moment as perhaps the Blue Jays. I'm curious as to what your psychological screening is when you're at the ID stage of looking at getting players in.
Great question. And there's a lot of that sort of proprietary for understandable reasons, but we do have different levels of makeup. Goodness, I should have anticipated this question. Thinking about, I know we're being recorded right now too. But I think that what I will say is that there are a combination of written tests and also text analysis and also interviews, stages that can happen. And one of the really challenging things is also simply profiling what does good look like. So we're really acknowledge that a lot of our thinking right now is around profiling and taking what we know from other industries on things like conscientiousness and other constructs that are profiling across our existing 200 players in our system and looking at different parameters that do predict success. So for example, one is speed of transition through our system. To reach a certain level in a certain period of time, we know is a predictor of making it to the major league level. And so looking at what does that mean and being able to reverse engineer so we can do a better job on profiling. One of our challenges is that it can take 5 years for those guys to make it. And so being able to get a really robust profile is actually going to take us some time before we really know how effective it is. Sorry for the cop-out, but...
Thanks very much. It's Greg White from Liverpool John Moores. Who looks after the staff? And what is the staff turnover rate like?
I'm really glad you asked that question because I think that's one of my chief roles, honestly, as I think in terms of paradigm shifts, so much attention is put around the player. I've really worked to shift that culture into we're all performers. And so prepare, work, recover acts as a really simple framework for players and everybody. And so there is very little recovery focused on our staff, and because of the daily routine, there's actually not always great preparation because it's business as usual. So we've even last year, I don't speak and talk in groups like this much anymore, but we certainly tried to, we worked with our scouts on being a high performer as a scout, how to prepare, how to work, recover, how to eat on the road, how to manage travel, you know, what exercises to do, the mindset, dealing with failure. You know, a lot of the things that we're working through with players, we are working through with staff, and whether that's also having a profile, a development plan, goals for staff to aspire to. The turnover rate isn't huge. As I mentioned, we have a lot of staff who've been there 20 years plus, but there's been a massive amount of hiring too, and I just had to let go of 4 people, unfortunately, and that was largely around their growth mindset and fit of where we are, the pace of change we're asking for. So some of that's been forced, but I think that is a big shift, and I think I see the same issue across all kind of high-performance sports, is that staff are the ones you have to watch out for because they are so giving and so such perfectionists in their own right a lot of the time that they'll do more harm to themselves or their families and relationships than they will for the player. So it's a great question.
I was wondering if you do anything in the way of athlete education to get them on board, not only at the 7-year-old age, but as they progress through?
Again, great question. So certainly I mentioned the transition focus we have for players. So we have certainly started to institute more of a life skills curriculum program, especially for our younger players who are transitioning, especially across cultures, you know, from Latin America across into the United States. And I think you hit on something really interesting, which is we focus on development. In fact, our minor league system is called player development. But I think they're totally missing the boat on our major league roster, and the fact that you're not supposed to develop there, you're just supposed to win. It's like, man, the best performers I've ever known are learners. And it doesn't matter if they're an all-star or Hall of Famer, they want to get better, and they want feedback, and they want to push themselves. And so I think there's an opportunity, and we provide more of that on an individual resource basis. But I think there's a massive opportunity for more education at the very top level too. So it's an interesting misnomer. We make a lot of assumptions about how sophisticated and developed a lot of the very best are, when actually they're often not. They're often asking for help.
Okay, everyone, the session's coming to a little bit over before going into break, but Angus is going to be around